Hey guys, how you doing? It's Rogway here, and I'm back with a weekly tutorial. And today we are talking about the basics of Illustrator, how to use Illustrator, how to create amazing artwork with Illustrator. By the way, I hope everybody's safe and healthy and relaxing, taking this time to kind of relax and recuperate and, you know, explore some of your creativity here during this time. It's really good to you know, stay busy. And so anyways, last week we looked at the basics of Illustrator, and I kind of introduced what Illustrator is, and maybe I didn't really give enough reason why we learn Illustrator and graphics in the first place. But an essential skill as a graphic designer is to know how to create vector artwork. And what I mean by vector artwork are, you don't have to look far. If we're talking about things like logos, or we're talking about things like stickers, in this case vinyl stickers, if we're looking at all of these forms of these art creations that have been made, you'll notice that all of them kind of have something in common, and it is that the artwork looks very clean and crisp, and it doesn't. I mean, it is hand drawn, but you can tell it's super clean. All right, it's not like it's sketched with a pencil that would leave these sketchy lines or whatever. It's very clean and crisp. And that's really what vector artwork is going to create, right? That's what we're going for. Same thing on like graphic t-shirts. You know, all of these graphic t-shirts, not all, but most graphic t-shirts are going to use vector artwork because, again, it's very clean, crisp. It can be scaled up or down as much as you want, bigger or smaller. All of this is going to be created using a vector artwork program like Illustrator, okay, or it was Illustrator. And so the whole reason we stick to vector is because of that fact that the things we make in Illustrator can be scaled or used at any size, and they're always going to look perfect, right? So things like logos, things like stickers, things like shirts, things like all these things that we're going to want to scale up or down, and we don't want it to look pixelated. We're going to use Illustrator to do that. So let's take a look at Illustrator itself. Let's take a look at how to use Illustrator. We're going to launch Illustrator here. And I have a new document here, but I'm actually going to show you how to start a new document. We're going to go to File, New. And just like with Photoshop, we're going to go to Print. I'm going to start a letter size page. Now, I want to start off by saying you do not necessarily have to be an amazing artist to use Illustrator. All right? If you have creative ability, for sure, it's going to help. All right? But Illustrator has tools that allow you to create artwork relatively easy. The name Illustrator is basically a program made for people who want to illustrate, right? It's in the name. And so let's say I was not an artist, and let's say I had no idea how to draw something. Well, what I would probably think about is how would I do that in the real world? If I was going to draw something or copy something in the real world, what would I do? Well, chances are I would take my original artwork and I would either look at it and try to copy it, or if I want it to be more accurate, I would trace it. All right? So in Illustrator, we're just going to go to Window. We're going to go to Layers. I'm going to just get my layers showing here. You'll notice right now we have a blank page. And I want you to kind of imagine that this blank page is a piece of paper that you're holding in front of you. And what we're going to do is we're going to go and place something on the page. So I'm going to go to File, I'm going to go to Place, and I'm going to put down some sort of artwork. Now the artwork I'm going to start with here is super simple. And I'm going to explain why it's simple in a second. But I'm going to just take the Reddit logo, something really easy. And you'll see that when you do, it's going to come in here, it's going to be pretty huge. So I'm just going to scale it down so that I can get it to fit. I might have to actually zoom out a bit to see it all. But there's the Reddit logo. Okay, so there's the Reddit logo. And I'm going to actually double click the name of the layer. I'm going to call this original. Oops. Original. It'd be good if I could spell. And I'm going to lock it. Okay, so there's the original artwork. And now, again, imagining how I would do this in real life, in the real world, I'm going to make a layer above it. I'm going to call this layer Trace. Okay. Now, this Reddit logo was actually just pixels. It was just a Photoshop file. When I zoom in on it, you're going to see that as I get really close, we start to see that pixelation that tells us that that file is just made of pixels. All right, we are going to vectorize it to make it look better. Now, I'm not going to do the whole thing. I could do this pretty quick, but I want to just show you the basics of Illustrator here. So with the trace layer, we have this palette in Illustrator called primitives. And if you look on mine, it's 5 tools down. It's going to have a rectangle, I think, by default. But if you click and hold, you will see other primitive shapes within there. And for basic logos and, in this case, pretty much everything, almost everything in this picture is made of primitives. So let's take a look at quickly, maybe just starting by making even just the head here really quickly. So I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to use the ellipse tool, because as you can tell, everything in here is, well, not everything, but a lot of circles or ellipses in this picture. Now, everybody's different. I'm going to give you my advice on how I would do this. Everybody's different. First of all, I try to think in my head which parts of this logo are furthest away from me. And I know that might not make a lot of sense right now, but I'm going to show you. I would say that these ears are the furthest back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click, and if I hold Shift, I will get a perfect circle. Now, if I want to move this circle around before I let go, I can hold the space bar. And the space bar will allow me to move the circle so that it falls. I want to go directly in the middle of the ear. And what I mean by middle is, oops, a little bit too big. I want to place my circle along the middle of this circle. Now you'll notice it's kind of weird because my circle has covered up what's underneath. And the reason for that is just like in Photoshop, we have a fill and we have an outline or a stroke. In Photoshop, it'd be a foreground and a background. But in Illustrator, what this is telling us is that this circle is filled with white and it's got a black outline. So let's say we don't want to have the white fill. We can go to our fill and we can just click none. That will turn the fill off. Now for the outline, because we've got a black line on a black trace, we're going to just really quickly change it to a color we can see. So I'm going to go to Window, Color. It's going to be right here, and I'm going to actually just put it to a kind of a bright pink so I can see it show up. The next thing we got to do is we got to match the thickness of the line. So we're going to go to Window, we're going to go to Stroke, and I'm going to bump up the thickness of that circle so that it is pretty much the same thickness as that original ear thickness. Okay? Now, one thing you can do with Illustrator that I recommend is right away what you should do is change the keyboard increments in your Illustrator. And the way you do that is you press Command K or Control K on a PC, and right here in keyboard increments I'm going to set it to a small amount, 0.1, and hit OK. And now when I click an object, okay, so I'm on the selection tool and I click this circle, if I use the arrow keys on my keyboard, I can move this object around in tiny, tiny little amounts. Okay? Now just a little trick, I'm going to hold Option on the Mac. I believe it's Alt on the PC, and that will allow me to copy out a copy of that circle or any shape that I select. If I hold Option or Alt, it'll drag a copy. So I just made both ears. Don't worry about this part that's coming into the head. I'll show you why it doesn't matter in a sec. While we're at it, we've got this little circle up here. We might as well grab one of these. Again, hold Option, drag it up there. Hold Shift while you scale it so it doesn't get stretched. And I'm just going to get this lined up nicely. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm just lining it up more or less on top of the original. Okay? So you can see with primitive shapes, we can go relatively quick and we can recreate this Reddit logo fairly quick. And this will work for very simple shapes. All right? I could keep going. I could finish this off. There's a couple things here that might be a little tricky. But for the most part, you can see how using primitives you can create some pretty simple objects in Illustrator. All right? And so I was going to show you how to do the head. I'm not going to do everything, but if I use the ellipse tool again and I draw the head, something like this, and again putting it in the middle, you'll see there that the head goes in pretty quick. And then if I want to hide these parts of the ears that are in front, I could just add a white fill and that will cover those up. So now you can see it's coming along and it's looking pretty good. So if I hide the original, okay, you can see how it's coming along. Now, again, I'm not going to do it all, but I will show you that if I zoom in on the artwork that I've created now with Illustrator, oops, and I zoom in and I can hold spacebar to kind of move around with the cursor just like you can in Photoshop, you'll see that this doesn't have any resolution. It's always going to look good. It's always going to look crisp no matter what size we get to. Now, one thing I want to show you before I move on is this little line that is kind of connecting the ball to the head. And so in this case, this is not just a standard shape. This is not just a circle or a square or whatever. This is a line. Okay? And in Illustrator, when we want to make a line, we need to use the pen tool. And the pen tool probably takes the most practice to get the hang of. But with the pen tool, you can make any shape you want. Okay? And it takes a bit of practice. So for now, I'm actually just going to turn off the fill so I only have an outline. And I'm going to click somewhere about here. And all I'm doing is clicking. Okay? And you'll notice that every time I click, it connects to the last point that I made. And if I hold the Command key, okay, the Command key on the Mac, I believe it's a Control key on the PC, I can click off of it and that line will stay there. Okay? Everything in Vector is made of something called Bezier Curves. And Bezier Curves take a bit of practice to get the hang of. Alright? By clicking with the pen tool, we can make straight lines of any shape we want. The problem is, they tend to look very jaggy, sharp-edged, and they don't look very good. So what we need to do to correct that is create a nice smooth line by clicking. And the next time we click, we're going to click and drag. So we're going to click and hold. And you'll notice that now we can put a curve into our line. These are called Bezier curve handles. This is what takes a lot of practice to get really good with. But I'm going to show you a trick on this next example that should make life much easier. Okay, so you can see how that's kind of smooth, it's not as jaggy, and it looks decent. Okay, now if you want, I will supply these files inside the tutorial folder. You can finish the Reddit logo guy if you want. All you have to do is put a circle here and here, fill it with a red. You can create a red if you want, or you can use the eyedropper and grab that red. For the circle on the mouth, little bit tricky. This is where you might want to practice your Bezier curves. So you can take your pen tool and you can click at the end and then click somewhere in the middle, pull it out, and then go to the end so you kind of make a smiley face. Okay. However you decide to do that's up to you. But obviously I can whip this thing off pretty quick. I'm just going to put an eye there. I'm going to actually switch it so that it's a fill instead, no stroke, holding Option or Alt, dragging a copy to the other side like so. I'm going to fill this in with white. And there's our Reddit logo more or less. Now if I want to change the lines to black, I just click, again with the selection tool, I hold Shift, select the lines that I want to affect. These are all going to be black, and you can see that the stroke color is right now kind of that pinkish color. I'll set it to black. There it is. And like I said, these eyes need to be kind of a reddish. Now again, I'm not doing this perfectly. I would actually normally go and select the proper color. Here I just kind of made a color that's similar. And there you go. That's your Reddit logo, more or less finished. It could be a little bit thicker, but you get the point. It's now vectorized. All right. So that is using primitive shapes. You'll notice that one thing about this Reddit logo is these end caps are flush. They're straight and they're harsh. If we want to change that, and again, this is just a bonus, we could always go to Window. We can go to Stroke. There it is, Stroke. It's right here. And in the Stroke window, we can go to these three little lines and go to Show Options. And we can change the cap to a round cap. That's going to give us that nice rounded edge on the end of our lines. Okay, so that's close. I mean, it's not perfect. The reason it's not perfect is some lines are thicker than others. I'm not going to worry about it because this is just to show you how Illustrator works. So method number one is to use primitives, and it's going to work for some things. But let's say I was actually an artist, or I wanted to do something even just a little more complicated. Let's say I wanted to actually trace a picture that I had drawn or something that I had found online. So I'm going to make a new document here, and I'm going to show you how you would handle that sort of a situation. Letter, create. File, place. I'm going to place this Star Wars cartoon that I thought was kind of cool. So let's just say I really like this picture. I really wanted to use it maybe as a sticker on my computer or my laptop or something. I really thought it was cool. Or maybe for my phone. Now you look at this picture, there's very few primitive shapes that we can use. Very few that can actually be used or created using primitives. Some of these we might be able to get away with just using the ellipse tool, right? But for the most part, this picture is made up of what's called organic shapes. And so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to call this original. in my layers. Original, I promise I know how to spell. I'm going to lock it. I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to call it trace. And we're going to get started on this one. Now my approach on this one is going to be different than my approach for that Reddit logo. Because for the Reddit logo, we made most of it just using primitive shapes, no big deal. But let's look at what happens when we've got something made up of these strange sort of objects that would not fall into a primitive category at all. Okay, let's take a look at that. So generally, this is going to happen all the time. You're going to run into this sort of situation where you got these objects or these pictures that have all sorts of crazy shapes in here. And so this is where the pen tool is going to come in very handy. And one thing I recommend when you use the pen tool, first of all, I would turn off the fill color because we can always add that after. Another thing I would do is I would click the stroke color, and just like we did with the Reddit logo, I would trace it out using a bright color, like a bright pink. It's going to make it so much easier to see. We're going to zoom in on the Stormtrooper's helmet here. And I am going to show you the easiest way to trace in Illustrator, or one of. Okay? A lot of people, when they're learning Illustrator, this is how they trace. They go click, 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 click. Okay? And what they're going to end up with is this jaggedy line. I'll just pull it off so you can see. That doesn't look nice and smooth like the original. So don't do that. Don't just click, click, click. Instead, here's what I would do. And this is the easiest way I can explain it. Take the pen tool, decide on what you're going to trace. So let's say I'm going to trace this piece of the picture. Click wherever you want to start. I like to start kind of at an end point. And then go up the object a little ways and click and drag. And all you're looking at, all you're focusing on is this line right here. This line going from this point to this point. Ignore these handles. Okay, just ignore them. Just make sure that this line lines up with the original. So watch again if you missed that. I made a point and I went over here, I click and drag, and all I'm looking at is that that line in between the two, as I click and drag, lines up to the original picture. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my mouse cursor back to the point that I just clicked. Okay, so I'm going to click on that point once again. And what that'll do is it will remove this handle that was coming out of this side. And what that will allow me to do is go further on this point to maybe the end. And I can click and drag, and now I'm just focusing on this little piece of the shape. Alright, so I'm just doing it a little bit at a time. Then I go back, I click, I get rid of that arm, I go to further up the shape, click and drag. You'll see that that line only needs a little bit of curve. And I go all the way to the end and I do the same thing, click and drag. Whoops, I forgot something. I forgot to click my last point. And then I click and drag here, get that line pointed, or that point lined up. And you're going to see that this object is going to have that nice smooth curve that we see, what we've seen in the original. Okay? Now you'll notice it's got these really sharp points sticking off of it. And the reason for that, pretty simple. This probably wouldn't have an outline on it. Instead, we would switch this. Okay, we could swap it so that it's just a fill. All right? And we would change it to black later. Okay? But there's that object. There's that piece. Now, let's say I'm ready to do the rest of the helmet. Let me show you how I would do it. I'm going to do it quickly here, so pay attention. I would start somewhere here, maybe at a corner. I'm going to click, I'm going to drag. I'm going to look at that red line, I'm going to go back, I'm going to click here. I'm going to click, I'm going to drag. I'm going to look at that line, I'm going to click here. I'm going to click and I'm going to drag, and I'm going to keep on going, guys. I'm going to keep on outlining everything. So the way I explain this to you is just imagine these lines are your pencil lines as you're tracing this picture. Okay? Just imagine that these are your pencil lines and you're going around and tracing this picture. Now, the one awesome thing about Illustrator, the one great thing about Illustrator versus doing this on paper, and I'll show you in a second when I get back to where I started. Almost there. We'll just go around this little piece here. Once I get back here, give me a second, you'll notice one little part isn't lined up very good down there. I did that on purpose. Okay, go back and click. And go back and click, and I'm back at where I started. I'm going to line that up. There's that shape. Now look at this. See this little piece right here? Well, that doesn't line up very good. So in Illustrator, what you can do, and this is a huge advantage over erasing it or trying to get it perfect with a pencil in real life, you can take the direct selection tool. This is this one here, the white arrow. And I can go back to that point, and I could say, okay, what went wrong here? This handle here needs to be adjusted to fix that. And you can see how that fixed that line now so that it's lined up nicely to the original. And then I can just keep on going. All right, I can do all these shapes. These could actually be done with the ellipse tool probably. They're not going to be perfect, but I can go around and just move my points around and create all these little pieces, all these little shapes that are in the original. I'm just going around and doing the exact same method. And you'll notice that the more you practice with this, the faster you're going to get. You could trace a picture like this, honestly. You could have this picture traced, I'm going to say, if you're fast and good, you could have it traced in less than a half an hour. All right. Now you'll notice I just did the top of the helmet kind of quick there. And one thing I do want to mention before we kind of end this right now is, what are we creating? What exactly is it that we're making? Well, if we go to View and we go to Outline, you'll notice that what we're actually creating are mathematical vector lines which eventually will create your picture. All right, it'll take some time, but it'll look really, really good in the end. Anyways, hopefully that was useful to you. You can save your files, save your tutorial files. This week we are going to be tracing vector pictures, so I want you to find something decent. Don't start with anything super, super easy. You know, don't stay away from things like emojis or really, really simple things. There will be a kind of a little assignment to go with this before you go on to creating your picture. But what I want you to focus on is just the tracing. Don't worry about coloring anything in yet. We're going to look at that next. For now, just trace a picture off of the internet that you find that you like. Follow these exact same steps. Make an original layer. Lock it so that it doesn't move. I forgot to mention that. Lock it by clicking in here. That forces it so it doesn't move. And then make your layer called Trace, and you're good to go. Okay, you're going to be able to pretty much recreate anything using this method. All right? So hopefully you found that helpful. Make sure to email me or comment if you have any questions, and I'll be sure to answer them right away. Good luck. Talk to you later.